Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am so happy to be hanging out with you guys tonight. I mean, I love talking about diabetes at the best of times, but the emotional side of diabetes, this is the good stuff. Thank you for joining us. I am Bridget McNulty from Sweet Life, Diabetic South Africans on Facebook, sweetlife.org.za on Instagram, and we are going to have such a good time. Let's dive in. So tonight, as you know, we're here to talk about the emotional side of diabetes. So that's like mental health stuff, but also just any of the things that you are struggling with. Feel free to put your comments on the live stream. Nila's already said hello. I love that we can see this here. We have an amazing set of panelists. I'll be introducing them to you. And we have clinical psychologist Daniel Sher here to help us answer some of the big questions tonight. So as we all know, there's diabetes mental health, and then there's like real life mental health. And the two of them don't always combine. So we're going to be talking about all aspects of it. Throw your questions in. We'll see how many we have time to answer. A big thing that came up when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about with the panelists before is this desire to just want to feel normal sometimes. And I think that's why I'm so excited that we're all here this evening, is that this is normal for us, right? We are living with diabetes every day, and it's just so lovely to all be in a same space where people understand what that means. So let's get started. Disclaimer, first of all, Daniel Sher is a clinical psychologist. The rest of us are just people living with type 1 diabetes. Don't make any changes to your medication. Don't make any rash decisions based on the contents of this evening. It's really just a chance for us all to hang out together and, sit around a fire. So, Daniel, come on stage. Can you give us an overview of mental health and diabetes in like 5 minutes? Good luck to you.
Thank you, Bridget. And thank you, Mel. Thank you, Abbott. Thank you, everybody, for having me on here. This is such a privilege. And obviously, as a psychologist, the emotional side of diabetes is very close to my heart. Being a type 1 diabetic myself and having had this condition for about 30 years, I've come to appreciate in my own personal capacity just how important it is to pay attention to this side of things. And fortunately these days, mental health, mental wellness, emotions, and diabetes are all being spoken about together more frequently. So, I mean, look, I don't think I need to convince anybody here that this is an important topic. I think anybody who has had to tap into their own psychological resilience, and that's a term that I'm going to be dropping frequently tonight, but all of you have had to do that at some point. And so, I don't need to convince you that this is important. However, just in case you're on the fence, I would like to quickly run through some statistics which just really reaffirm the significance of thinking about mental well-being as people with diabetes. So before I get into some practical pointers, let's go through the doom and gloom stats. As people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2, we are 2 to 3 times more likely than anybody else to develop full-blown clinical depression. That's significant. That's a good deal more likely. What about anxiety disorders? 20% of all people living with type 1 diabetes meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder. And now that's not just, a feeling of anxiety. That is a full-blown constellation of symptoms which can be diagnosed. Then, of course, we get eating disorders. So type 1 diabetics in particular, and female type 1 diabetics in particular, are way more vulnerable than the general population when it comes to eating disorders such as bulimia, anorexia, what we call diabulimia, which I'm not going to get into too much today, and binge eating disorder. So we're twice as likely as people without the condition to develop those sorts of conditions. Then on top of that, the other things that we need to think about, which aren't necessarily psychiatric disorders, but are really relevant for us. The first is diabetes burnout. So if you take a group of diabetics and you follow them for 18 months, on average, half of them will qualify for a diagnosis of diabetes burnout within that period. That's, if we follow everybody here for 18 months, half of us will have diabetes burnout. So basically, with these horrible statistics, what I'm reaffirming to you is that we are vulnerable to psychiatric conditions, and we are vulnerable to emotional factors which stop us from being able to live our best lives, but also stop us from being able to thrive as diabetics. Ultimately, if we want to be happy, we want to be healthy, we want to live our lives to the best of our abilities, we need to be thinking about these emotional factors. And it's really important for us to have this conversation, because recent research shows that 1 in 3 diabetics who have a psychiatric disorder don't get help for it. And that is a huge pity, because these conditions that I've spoken about so far, they're very much treatable. And when you get the right support, you're going to find that your life improves, not just as a person who wants to be happy and healthy, but as a diabetic trying to manage the condition to the best of their abilities. So I will stop my speech at that. And I
you did it. We said, can you give us an overview in 5 minutes? And you did it. I feel like you deserve an Olympic medal for that right there. But also, I think we've already got a question on what diabetes burnout looks like, and I know you're going to speak to that later. And I think it's just so important also for us all to be in a space together where we can recognize that while many of us are doing well with diabetes, that's not the norm. Like, that's not we're not all climbing mountains and conquering our dreams and not letting diabetes stand in our way. I mean, I always say I don't let it stop me from doing anything, but that doesn't mean it doesn't really piss me off a lot of the time and bum me out. And yeah, it's not, even if it seems as if people are doing really well, there are always so many layers to our condition. Hey. Absolutely. So I am also, just to know the way this works, for those of you who weren't here last time, we will answer as many questions as we can live, but then we'll follow up with you tomorrow as well, because these all live on our Facebook page, which is amazing. Go Modern Tech. So I want to introduce the panel, and I'm going to give each of our panelists a turn to discuss kind of the element of the emotional side of diabetes that they have found loudest in their lives. So we have 5 panelists today: Kirsten de Klerk, Tapi Semenya, Earl Prinsloo, Elissa Pillay, and Matthew Gay. And I'm going to introduce them one by one. So Kirsten's up first, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about the long-term, like her fear and denial around long-term complications. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Bridget, and thanks for having me here. I've been a type 1 diabetic for 11 years now. I am 27 years old, and I got diagnosed at the age of 16. And I think something that has always kind of played on my mind, or something that's always kind of held a very emotional thing towards diabetes for me, is the fear and denial of long-term complications. I actually vividly remember my mom on the phone with my GP, and him obviously telling her that I had diabetes. And she came through to my room because I was basically semi-comatose. I wasn't in DKA yet, but she came into my room and she told me I had diabetes and that we needed to get to a diabetic specialist as soon as possible. So we got into the car. It was like in the evening, and we were driving through to the specialist. And I remember thinking, what is diabetes? I'd never really known much about it before. I didn't really know what it was. So I sat in the back of the car and I Googled, am I going to die if I have diabetes? Because I felt like I was about to die. We all know when you're that close to DKA, it's a very scary experience. And I remember all of these very terrible things coming up from all the long-term complications, including kidney failure, going blind, lower limb amputation, heart failure. The list goes on. And it painted a very dreary picture for me. And I remember kind of like rocking up in the room that night with the doctor, and I was like, what does my future look like? And he said, you know what, if you look after yourself, you are going to be fine. And so my diabetes journey started, and I was like the prime diabetic. He always called me his star pupil when he was treating me, because my sugar levels were just perfect for the first couple of years. And it was only when I started going to college, or I started my new job, that, I really started struggling with my diabetes management. I started seeing numbers I didn't like to see. And that's when those looming long-term complications started playing on my mind again. You know, maybe I wasn't going to be able to have a healthy pregnancy one day. Maybe I'm going to lose my limb, you know, and I started making jokes about these things. But, you know, it was something that really, really started to panic me as I got into my mid-20s. And to be honest, I thought not much of it. I thought maybe it was more a type 2 thing and that I was going to be fine because I was on insulin and I was looking after myself and doing these things. And not long after that, I think he's actually on the call, I met Sally Hendricks, and he is a type 1 diabetic who got diagnosed at a similar time to me. And it was about a year later that unfortunately he had to go through the low limb amputation process. And I think once again, I remember sitting in Mossel Bay getting the phone call to say that unfortunately they had to amputate his leg. And I just remember thinking, whew, like again, like this could be us, this could be me. So I think for me, I think that's my biggest fear of having diabetes is what's to come. As much as we look after ourselves now, what does the future look like? You know, can I prevent these things, or is it kind of inevitable that this is what my future holds? Yeah,
that's true for all of us too, hey? Because I mean, as much as you try and not think about long-term complications, and we all want to say, oh, I'm doing my best and I'm doing the right thing, so maybe it's not going to happen to me. It is actually, I mean, death, taxes, diabetics, long-term complications. It's something we have to be aware of. I think what's so amazing about Sally, just to give him a little shout out, is that he didn't have an amputation and then sit around feeling sorry for himself. He's had an amputation and he's used it as a awareness and education tool to help other people get the information that he didn't have when he was younger. And I have so much admiration for him. I think it's
incredible. Yes.
Thank you for sharing, Kirsten. Next up, we have Toppy. And Toppy was talking about how she has actually had mental health issues before and how to balance that and diabetes, because I sometimes feel like diabetes should be its own mental health condition as well as it being a physical condition because of all the things we have to deal with. So Tappy, what would you like to share with us today?
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. So, okay, I have had diabetes for 15 years this year. And so basically, when I was younger, I didn't accept my diabetes for what it was. And I just tried to pass it by. So I think I just kind of had like trauma behind the scenes. And then I started having major issues in my first year of varsity. And I was then diagnosed with bipolar type 1. So with bipolar and diabetes, it's twice as hard. It's very difficult to handle the two. And I think personally, it's a struggle. It is very tough. But also seeking help is the toughest part, because now it's like you have this disease and then you have this other thing as well. And now it's like two things at the same time. It's just a lot. And one thing I think people don't want to do a lot is therapy. Therapy does help a lot, and reflection and everything. And I think even with having like bipolar, I still struggle. Each and every day is a struggle for me. And I find that, I get triggered easily when someone is saying something. I'm just like, oh my gosh, shut up. Like, don't say this, But it's a learning curve. And it's just really difficult, though. I won't even lie. You change medications and then find the one medication is not abiding with the other one. And it's like, what do I do now? And then you have pressure from your parents, and then it's, pressures from everywhere. So, but therapy does help. And I think as someone who has mental health issues and, my diabetes as well, you need the support. Like, you need to support people who are going through this, because it's difficult. It is truly difficult. And yeah.
And also, I just think it's so wonderful and important to just be sharing about it too. Like when we were, just to tell everyone else, when we were preparing for this, I said, like, what kind of stuff do you guys want to talk about? And there's this idea that if you want to talk about something, then you also have to have the answer. So you have to be able to say, like, well, I used to struggle with this, but now I've found this magical cure and I no longer struggle with it. And that's not life. Like, life is that you struggle with something, and then you struggle with something, and then you struggle with something, and you maybe find some tools that help a little bit, but you still struggle with something. And I think let's just accept that that's what we're doing and give ourselves a pat on the back, because that's to be juggling two conditions is, a real juggling act. So yeah, keep at it. I think it's amazing. Oh, speaking of juggling two conditions, tell us about the pandemic, because the pandemic with diabetes was stressful enough, and then you threw another chronic condition on top of that. What was that like?
Hi, evening, everyone. So first of all, let me just say thanks to all of you for taking the time out to join us. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to chat to you tonight and share my experience. So just as a disclaimer, I'm not a clinical psychologist as Bridget stated, but I would like to share like my experience with mental health and more specifically anxiety on three different levels. I mean, the way I understand it is like you get the clinical level, you've got the anxiety caused by diabetes, and then even people who don't have any condition experience some form of anxiety when the pandemic hit, right? Because there was a whole lot of uncertainty around job losses, how long we're going to be locked down for, etc. And personally, for myself, I never really like struggled with any like mental health condition, while growing up, or at least that's what I thought. And now that I'm older, I realize that when I was 10, 11 years old and we did like these little tests in primary school, I would actually feel really flustered. I would like feel like I can't breathe, like I would literally sweat. And now that I'm older and there's more awareness around mental health, it's like I kind of realized that, look, I wasn't nervous. I wouldn't even say a nervous kid, but just like I actually like struggled with anxiety as a child. But when the pandemic hit, there was just so much stress around, all these deaths being reported around people with comorbidities and people losing their jobs, people infecting their parents. And luckily, my wife and I live on our own, away from parents. So we definitely kept our distance. And it was just the uncertainty of the pandemic, having to deal with diabetes, and also dealing with another chronic condition, which is chronic autoimmune hepatitis. Apparently, it's common that type 1 diabetics, that same response that happened on the pancreas happened on my liver. So now I find myself taking immunosuppressants. And I'm thinking to myself, in the pandemic, if I should catch COVID, you kind of fully reliant on your immune system. And I am taking drugs to actually keep my immune system down. So all of that, sort of like really started playing on my head. And, fortunately, there was no strain around job losses for me because I'm able to work from home. But what I can say is that it's really, really important when you're dealing with that. I mean, mental health issues just on its own as a clinical condition is already a challenge, and I feel like it's quite neglected in the country. But there's definitely a lot more awareness now being brought to it in terms of the priority areas. And it's super like difficult to delineate between whether it's mental health by diabetes or mental health caused by the pandemic, because like everything just seems like it's all just mushed together in this big pot of uncertainty, and at the same time you've got things like this, which I used to see as a blessing and a curse, because something like this you need to survive as a type 1 diabetic, but at the same time too much of it can kill you. And that's where things like this comes in, where it just makes life easier. And I mean, you can feel free to drop comments, just comment in the section below and let me know if being able to actually monitor your blood glucose actually with a Libra or whatever sensor you use actually helps in reducing some of that anxiety. I'd actually be interested to read some of your comments. But it's just so important. And I mean, big shout out to my wife, Heather. I mean, look, you need that social support. And even if you as a person feel like you don't have that social support, be it in your family or among your friends or a partner, the diabetes community is large, and maybe not as large as the American community, but we're building in our country. We are. So we're always here to support, and feel free to just give any of us a shout out, because it can be very, very overwhelming you know, especially if we go in and out of waves in the pandemic, and it just, yeah.
That's the
It
bit
just
that I
causes
found
quite
the
a
most
strain.
challenging is the waves. Like, I feel like, okay, we're just used to this now. We're not
Here we
allowed
go
to leave
again.
our homes. We can't see anyone. And then they're like, oh no, it's fine. You can go out a little bit. And then you go out and you're like, oh, this is so nice. And then they're like, no, back in your house, back in your house. Someone just said now, it felt like Wendy said at the start of COVID, before we understood it, it felt like if you had diabetes, you had a target on your back. And that's exactly what it felt like. Like, it was just too scary to ever leave. And I love that you gave a shout out to your wife. I want to give a shout out to Nkululeko, who doesn't have diabetes, but lost a friend to it and is here to learn and pass on the knowledge she's gathered. I think that's so beautiful. And someone else wanted to know if the session's being recorded. It is. It'll be available on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. I'm probably going to be watching it again tomorrow and just muting the bits where I talk, because it's just, this is the goal, guys. This is what we need to talk about. We are noticing all your comments. We got 2 panelists left, and then we're going to open up the floor to everyone. So, Alyssa, can you tell us a little about the overwhelm of diabetes and trying to hold it together for other people around you?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Melissa and I've been diabetic for 2.5 years. So I'm still the baby out of my diabetes family on the screen. So when I was diagnosed until now, and they told me this topic, and I told the team, I'm like, I didn't suffer from any mental health issues. And then I stopped a bit and I thought back of when I was first diagnosed. And in my mind, it was troubling me, but I had to keep it together because I'm like, oh, if the people around me saw me struggle with this, it would make it worse for them because I already know that they stressed out and they worried. And even today, like, I try to keep quiet on if my sugar is too high or too low because I'm just afraid in the back of my mind. I'm like, I don't want anybody to worry about me. I'm okay. So yeah, that's where I struggled mentally.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And it's also, there's something quite tempting about pretending it's not that big a deal, because then it doesn't take up that much space and you're like, oh no, I'm fine, everything's fine, I can do anything. But we can do anything, but it is more challenging sometimes to do those things.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of comments now about Libras and CGM, and we will get to all of those. We've got Matthew's going to be telling us, and then we're going to open up the floor and open up the floor also to our panelists if you have any questions. I just want to say I am so delighted that we are all here together, and I am so grateful that everyone has taken the time. Thank you this evening. Matthew, tell us about what it's like to have a kid with diabetes, because I can't imagine. And your son was recently diagnosed, still recently. And yeah, can you tell us a bit about that shock of diagnosis?
Hi. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I feel overwhelmed at being here and very I don't know, maybe out of place, or like I shouldn't be on this side of the camera. I'm really so in awe of all you guys, and thank you for doing this and sharing for people like me who need to learn to help others. When Jude was diagnosed, it was like being hit with a sledgehammer. It wasn't even anywhere on my radar of things. I have asthma. So in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, my kids might get asthma one day, and that's okay, I can deal with that. But when one Friday, Jude just started to drink water, and he drank water that whole day, and we were like, oh, okay, he's pretty thirsty, but he wasn't running around too much. And then the Saturday again, and then he was 3.5. It was pretty much a year ago now. Yeah, he was pretty much out of nappies, and then that weekend he started to go back into nappies, and we were like, what's going on? He seems fine. Everything else seems fine. He was running about. He was happy. On the Monday, it was still going on, and so we took him to the doctor, and his blood sugars were at 30, 36, I think, 37. And so we immediately rushed him to hospital. And from there, it was just a whirlwind of blows. Poor little guy. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. When your kids are sick, it's just heartbreaking. And then to discover, you know, it's diabetes, which my only experience with diabetes was a kid in my class who I've sort of vaguely kept in touch with, and I'm 40 now, and I know he's pretty much lost his eyesight, and you know, so I had all of those fears that you know, what now and how, and that's pretty much how I met you, Bridget. Is we just got put on the Freestyle Libre, which was very hard with a 3-year-old who hates needles or hated needles. So it was just a world of trauma for everyone. Us having to hold you down to inject him and trying to figure out how to put the sensor on, and then him wriggling and it going out. And we found the Freestyle was the easiest one to put in. And then I was driving down the road one day in a bit of a mess, and I saw a lady walking on the side of the road with her friend, and I just out the corner of my eye, I saw that she had a Freestyle Libre on her arm, and I drove down the road a little bit, and then I was like, no, okay, man up, I'm gonna go meet this person because maybe she can help me. And it was the best thing that I ever did, because now I'm here and I get to learn from all you guys. So thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Yeah, and thanks again.
I mean, I've been diabetic for 14 years this year, and I've got kids, and I can't imagine what it must be like. Like, I think parents of kids with diabetes are just total superheroes, because at least, I mean, I've got the condition, but it's just me. I'm not trying to live outside my body. So I think you guys are just amazing. And Jude's so awesome and cheery and cute. And
he's cool. Hey.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched those stop motion animations? I'm just gonna take these out there. Waste of time. Those stop motion animations where you see the animators working behind these animated characters on the front.
Yeah.
On the screen, and you see like this blur of action behind. That's kind of how I feel as a type 1 diabetic parent. Is you're trying to not tell your kid any different. Yeah. Let him like just live and be, and like every 20 minutes or when he's sick or every hour, like you're swooping down with the phone, like, okay, check, and then like, okay, here's a carrot, or here's a jelly bean. He's eaten more jelly bean than he ever had before in his life since he was diagnosed.
My kids are so jealous. Anytime I'm like, ugh, I hate jelly beans, but that's why I use them as a low snack, because I won't overeat them. And they're like, ooh, what you got there? And I'm like, no, it's for my blood sugar. And they're like, oh. There were a bunch of, I'm going to open up to Daniel now to somehow respond to all these amazing panelists. But there've been a bunch of questions, and I want to answer the easy ones I can, because the practical ones. So there were a bunch of questions about the Libre, which has been mentioned a few times. So apparently, there are CGMs, which are continuous glucose monitors, and then this is a flash glucose monitor, which is like the kind of simplest version of a CGM, but also the most affordable. It doesn't alarm, that's the only thing it doesn't do, but you insert it into your arm. I'm wearing the wrong shirt, it's under here. And then you can scan an app on your, you can scan an app on your phone, and it gives you your blood sugar all the time. So you never have to use finger sticks again. And I know there were a bunch of questions here about how much they cost and if they're covered by medical aid. It's an ongoing battle. At present, it's covered by Discovery. If you're on, let me get this right, I will give all the details, the real details tomorrow if I don't remember. But if you're on the top 2 tiers and you're a child, you get 2 sensors a month for free. 1 sensor lasts 2 weeks. If you're on the top 2 tiers and you're an adult, you pay $3.90 copay. And then if you're on the other tiers and you're a child, you pay $3.90 copay. And if you're on the other tiers and you're an adult, you pay $7.80. So I'm on hospital plan, I pay $7.80 and I get 2 sensors a month, which is significantly more obviously than strips if your strips were covered, but it's extraordinary. It's like 24 hours a day data. You can see trends. You can see exactly what different food does to your blood sugar. You can see what's going on overnight. It is not available freely to diabetics on medical schemes. You are right, Rian. So you've been fighting with GEMS. I know someone else has also been fighting with GEMS. There are other medical aids that are coming on board. So there's gonna be a tipping point soon, and we're hoping that it's next year. Coastal Saver will cover it, Lee. I will give you the details tomorrow because I'm on Coastal Saver. That's hospital plan. And then I just had to say, PJ, who's like a long-time member of our community, type 1, got diagnosed with COVID today and lost a grandparent today. Oh man, I'm so sorry. It definitely impacts your sugar, and it also just impacts your heartache. I hope you are feeling okay with the COVID, and that it's a milder dose. Yeah, okay, I could just chat on. Let's hand over to Daniel. Daniel, what you got to say about our panelists? I mean, 5 very different emotional sides of diabetes.
Sure. And yeah, I think we really got, a beautiful cross-section of the sort of issues that have been coming up in my own work with my patients, in particular over the past, year or so with COVID. So firstly, before I briefly touch on some of the things that came up, thank you all for, being open and honest and reaching out to the community. It's, again, it's just striking what an amazingly supportive community we have here. So just to breeze through, Kirsten, firstly, I hear you. I think fear of long-term complications is something that's hugely relevant for us to think about when we consider the emotional side of diabetes. Why? If we are not feeling optimistic about our future, if we're feeling a sense of hopelessness, of futility, then how do we expect to muster up the kind of motivation and the kind of optimism that we need to make healthy choices on a day-by-day basis? So that's a big struggle. And, I'm going to borrow a really awesome example from a guy who I quote all the time. He's exceptional. He is the diabetes psychologist from UCLA. His name is Dr. Polanski. And he always, when he has a talk, he'll give this example. He'll put it to the crowd. Who wants to tell me what the leading cause of kidney failure, renal problems, blindness, and amputations is? And invariably, somebody in the crowd will say diabetes. And that's an opportunity for us to evaluate that assumption, because the answer is not diabetes. The answer is uncontrolled diabetes. So we have the capacity to determine our destiny in that regard. And if we put in the things that we need to put in on a day-by-day basis, we can avoid those long-term consequences. It's just about knowing the facts and, ensuring that we have enough support to do that. So, Kirsten, thank you for bringing that up. Tapi, so much respect to you. My goodness, diabetes, we all know how challenging it can be, and bipolar is no different. It brings with its own set of challenges. And I really, really admire and respect how you own that condition. Not a shred of shame, when you broadcast it to this community. And that's so important. I mean, the diabetes community has come a long way in terms of breaking down stigma. The mental health community is doing the same thing. But when you sit with both conditions, you're really sitting with a lot. So props to you for being so out there with it. And also, thank you for recommending therapy. I appreciate that one. I'm with you there.
Daniel's going to give you some commission.
Yeah, we could sort something out there. Okay. Oh, that pandemic, you are so right. There's been really fascinating research done on the general population, which has shown that psychiatric conditions have skyrocketed in people who don't have diabetes, right? So in particular, anxiety disorders, but also depression. Those are the two main culprits. And what we're seeing is if you are a non-diabetic and you previously had anxiety or depression, you're way more likely to have a resurgence of those symptoms due to COVID. And that's due to pandemic, due to lockdown, not due to having the illness itself, which is a whole other story. So, if we put that in conjunction with what I was saying earlier about how we as diabetics are more likely than anybody else to develop depression and anxiety, it makes sense then that as diabetics in a pandemic, which is, attracting headlines about comorbidities, diabetes leading to death, etc., etc. I mean, we're under so much strain. There's just so much to cope with for people who have diabetes at the moment. So again, thank you for raising that. Such a relevant topic to think about.
Thanks, Ed.
Alyssa, welcome to the family. 2.5 years. Just watch, it'll fly by. And I hear you. You know, it's I think with diabetes these days, it's really fantastic how online communities have blossomed, and we can go on Instagram and we can see people thriving with this condition. We can see athletes, we can see pop stars, arguably not my favorite musician. We all know who I'm talking about. His name.
Not that we're causing judgment here, Daniel.
Yeah, there's no judgment. So we have all of these positive role models, but the downside to that is some of us who are sitting with the reality of the struggle that is inherent in this condition, some of us feel like we're just not measuring up. And that can be a lot of pressure to sort of take on board. So I'm glad that you raised that as well, because I'm sure that a lot of people in this talk resonate with that. And it's also a really important thing for us to think about, you know, what are our expectations for ourselves? Are they realistic? Are we setting us up for failure by, you know, having unrealistic expectations for ourselves?
I agree.
And Matt, my goodness, all of the people in this chat who are parents know that that in itself is hugely challenging. We also know how challenging it can be to manage your own diabetes. Managing that in a child, I can't imagine the difficulty that that must bring with it. So much respect for you for bringing that up. And no doubt there are a lot of people in this chat who will resonate with the difficulties that you've faced. You know, I get a lot of concerned parents who consult with me just to try to find ways of creatively forging the way forward. And it's not even about ensuring that their children are safe. It's about, how do I empower my child to live their best life despite the challenges that they face? There's no straightforward answer to that question, but it is something that collaboratively we can brainstorm. And, you know, I say that as a diabetes therapist, but it's something that no doubt you and your family have been brainstorming endlessly, and no doubt you're learning some really valuable lessons. And I think you're gonna be able to help a lot of people in this community with that wisdom.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. You did it again. When we did the pre-talk, I was like, you can have 5 minutes to respond to 5 different people. And I thought it was going to be impossible. Guys, there are so many questions. So the first one, because we have 2 people on the group or on the chat who have been diagnosed in the last week, Taryn and Stephen. And I think I maybe even saw another one and couldn't keep track. So here is my question for everyone. Newly diagnosed 1 week in. Oh, guys, I feel you. It feels like it's the end. It's not the end. It's going to be okay. One piece of advice. I want one piece of advice from each panelist. When I was first diagnosed, the advice was terrible. They were essentially like, off you go. Now you're at greater risk of heart disease, kidney failure, blindness, amputation, all best. And then they like sent me off. No one said, or it's possible to live a perfectly normal, happy, healthy life. So that's my advice. It is possible to live a perfectly normal, happy, healthy life. There are issues, as you can see from here, but then there are also people who are here to help you. So welcome. I'm sorry you're here, but I'm also really pleased that you're here. Daniel, your one-liner, what you got?
Sure. Yeah, look, it's a huge thing to take on board, right? I mean, you've got so much to think about. You probably don't even have the mental space at this point to kind of connect with the emotional ramifications of what it means to have this illness, because your brain's probably full of, how do I carb count? What can I eat? How do I calculate nutritional values, etc. But look, as overwhelming as it can be at this point, you're also faced here with an opportunity to tap into the resilience. That's the thing that I mentioned earlier on. Resilience is an exceptional quality of human beings. And we see some people who have gone through the most traumatic circumstances and have come out not just surviving, but in fact thriving. Diabetes gives you an opportunity to do that. And although it can be incredibly tough, I've seen people do exceptionally well and come out better than they would have been otherwise because of this condition. So all the best to you.
Kirsten, what you got?
First, I'll just say that it's incredible that you are here. Like,
No, well done.
1 week in, you've found your way very quickly. It took me about 9 years to find the type 1 community in South Africa, and it was tiny, and we're slowly growing. So, like, big ups to you for like making your way here, finding out more about what your future holds and what life is going to look like. And then I think just one bit of advice from me would be that, you know, like, if you have a bad day, don't let that take away all the progress you've made. A lot of the time in my past, I'd have a bad Monday and I'd be like, I'll write the whole week off. And I've learned now that, like, just because you had one bad day, it doesn't mean that tomorrow you can't wake up and have a brilliant rest of your week. So just remember that, like, I always take sleep as like a clean slate, and then tomorrow you start again. So look at it as each day a fresh start.
Love it. My mom always used to say, sleep is the great healer. And I think that's so true. It totally resets you. Solly, you would say diabetes is a blessing for you. You're amazing. Please elaborate on why in the comments. Alyssa, you're up. What would your one piece of advice be to the 3 people we've got now who were diagnosed in the last month?
Well, guys, congratulations for finding this community so quickly. One tip that I can give you, well, it's not my tip. It's a tip that my doctor gave me. Well, that kept me going. It's not actually a tip. It's a statement she always used to make when I used to be a bit nervous. She used to say, Alyssa, you diabetic, you have control over your disease. So what you do with it is up to you. And if you're going to look after yourself, you're going to outlive everyone. So that's what put a smile on my face and kept me going every time.
Yeah, what great advice. My doctor always said there's no such thing as a bad reading as long as you learn something from it, which also helped, because otherwise you can feel as if you're being graded and not passing. Tuppy, what's your one piece of advice? Vanessa, thank you. New diabetics, take it one day at a time. Please, anyone else, throw your advice in. What do you wish you'd been told in the first week or the first month of being diabetic? It's only that there's 5 of us talking, but please share your tips in the comments. Tuppy, what you got?
Okay, what works for me doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. So take it a day at a time and try and enjoy the process. That's my advice.
Okay, winner. Earl, what do you think? What do you wish you'd been told?
So my advice to the newbies would be, don't pay attention to what people are posting on social media, because there are certain individuals, like I can't think of anyone specifically, but you will see accounts where people portray a perfect life with perfect readings 100% of the time. That is nonsense. That is not reality. Don't let that influence you negatively. Don't let it make you feel like you are failing with your diabetes management, because I can guarantee you, everyone in this comment section, everyone in the panel, we have ups and downs, we have roller coasters. It happens more often than we actually would like to admit. So that's my advice to you. Be kind to yourself.
The reason those amazing readings make it onto Instagram is because the person is like, what the, how did this happen? Let's get evidence of it. But then that's all you see. It's like when you see people with young kids and they only post cute pics and they don't post all the other stuff. Speaking of kids, Matthew, what you got? What do you wish you'd been told? 6 months ago, a year ago?
What I wish I'd been told in that first week, but it probably wouldn't have sunk in. But what I've come to realize is that right now is the best time in history to be a diabetic, to have diabetes, with things like flash monitors and the insulins and the way that the technology is rapidly moving. It gives me so much hope and excitement for the future. One thing that I think is super important as a parent is to communicate very openly with your loved ones, with your spouse, with your family, at all times. Just because it's devastating for everybody at the beginning and it's hard, but it does get easier, and communication really just paves the way to getting to a good place, I feel.
There's some amazing tips in here. So amazing that I'm just going to steal them all with everyone's permission and put them into an article on sweetlife.org.za with here's the advice we all wish we'd been told and when we were first diagnosed, because like this is the gold. And that's the thing, doctors, bless their cotton socks, don't have diabetes, so they don't actually know what it's like. And it's so important to hear from people who do actually have it and know what it's like day by day. I promised earlier that we would talk about diabetes burnout. So Daniel, you're up. Please, can you tell us what it is and what to do about it? And also there was a question right in the beginning that I will try and scroll back to and post, but I'm not so tech savvy, about if there are cycles to it. Like, does diabetes burnout often recur every 6 months or every 3 years or something like that? Or is it a once-off, or does it vary person to person? Anything you got for us?
Cool. Yes. So, look, diabetes burnout is, again, a really, really important thing for us to be aware of. And I'm going to go back to that statistic. 18-month period, 50% of us will have it. And it's important to think about because it can be treated, and if it's left untreated, it continues, and it has a negative impact on our well-being, our behaviors, and of course, our blood sugar levels. So what is it exactly? Well, diabetes burnout, it's referred to in the literature, by the way, as diabetes distress. Now, that's important because this is not just a vague airy-fairy concept. This is something that's been studied rigorously for years, and we know a lot about it. So fortunately, I can answer these questions that were raised, and I can do so with reference to the evidence. Diabetes burnout is quite simply the emotional impact of living with this condition. So I'm going to borrow another nice metaphor that's often presented to the diabetes community. One day, the universe approaches you and it gives you a job. You don't have a choice as to whether you can accept the job. The payment isn't ideal. In fact, you don't get paid at all. And in fact, you have to pay to have the job. The job is full-time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you don't manage the job properly, if you don't get good results, then you're going to be in big trouble. And just for added bonus, you never get a holiday. So, I mean, look, we all get burnt out if we work too hard in our day jobs. Now, having that kind of a full-time commitment, it's inevitable that there's going to be a sense of, I just can't anymore. And that's what diabetes burnout is. You just don't have the motivation to care, to be motivated to look after yourself in the way that you should. It's a feeling
I do think, sorry to interrupt, there's also something about the language that we use, right? Like we test our blood sugar. Are we in good control or not? Is your diabetes controlled? Like there is this underlying layer of, are you succeeding or not at your diabetes? There isn't just a sense of, I'm trying my best and sometimes my sometimes my calculations are inaccurate, which is so much kinder. And I feel what we would do for everyone else, but when it comes to diabetes, and even many of us, when we go to our doctors, it's like, well, how are you doing? Are you in control? Like, do you get a tick or do you get a cross? And that's obviously going to lead to burnout because that's not sustainable.
100%, especially when you think about, how hard we can all work at our diabetes and still we're going to have off days. We're going to do everything right. And yet you're going to get that roller coaster in blood sugar. You're going to get that upwards arrow or the downwards arrow that we all hate. You're going to get an A1C that's a few points above where you want it to be. That's part of the process. And if we think that we are bad diabetics, quote, as a result of that, or if we think that we are failing as a result of that, that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
So, like, I think the way I'm speaking is fairly vague at the moment when I say that it's a feeling of overwhelm, it's a feeling of I can't anymore. And it's vague for a reason because diabetes can present in different ways. Sorry, diabetes burnout can present in different ways for different people. But some of the red flags to look out for are, as I said, you just don't have the energy to do what you need to do. You find yourself hating the condition. You find that you're skipping doctor's appointments or else you're dreading them. You're finding that you're kind of eating whatever you want and not sticking to that regimen. You're not able to muster up the sort of energy that you need to exercise enough to keep up with your blood sugar management. Also, you can be carrying a lot of anxiety around social interaction. So you might feel that you're being judged by other people. You might feel your doctors don't understand you or understand your needs. And the other red flag to look out for is just a sense of being completely out of control when it comes to your eating. So those are all possible signs of diabetes burnout.
I haven't heard this question before from Elise. Can other variables affect a spike in it, like stress or fatigue? So are there contributing factors, I suppose?
100%, 100%. And that actually goes back to the other fantastic question which was raised, which was as to, whether it goes in cycles. Mm-hmm. So what research has shown is that we are most at risk of developing diabetes burnout, immediately after diagnosis, when you're overwhelmed with all of this new information. So FYI to the people who are new to the family, please keep an eye out for these symptoms. The other risk factor is when you become aware of the risk of long-term complications. So by that, I mean, we all know that we're at risk of developing long-term complications if we don't manage the condition. But if you have a doctor's visit and you're suddenly alerted to the fact that after 10 years of living this condition, you've got proteins in your blood speaking to renal failure. Once that becomes a reality and you realize I'm on that trajectory, that's a precipitant for burnout. And the other precipitant is simply if there are other things going on in your life. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're stressed, if you've lost your job, you've lost a partner, all of these things, it makes sense, right? We only have a finite capacity of emotional energy to prop ourselves up in life. And we're already giving a huge portion of that to diabetes. When there's something else also taking from that reservoir, it makes sense that we're going to just run out of the motivation that we need.
Yeah. I just want to quickly ask, we're going to move on to depression because there are a bunch of questions around depression and uncontrolled diabetes and what to do. Does any of the panelists, do you want to speak to having had diabetes burnout at any stage and maybe what you did to help get out of it? Anyone? Kirsten, there you go. I see you unmuting.
It took me, I think it was about 2 years ago where I was experiencing diabetes burnout. As Daniel said, I stopped pricking my finger because I was seeing sugar levels that I didn't like. I stopped exercising. I kind of just started ignoring the fact that I had diabetes. I'd always take my insulin, but I was eating whatever I wanted. I was ignoring the management part of my diabetes. And it took me a really long time. And if I think back now, I honestly wish that I'd gone to see a therapist or that I'd gone to see someone, because I've realized now through this community how important it is to talk about what you're going through. And I think through finding this community, which was my endpoint, is actually finding another type 1 diabetic and speaking about everything I was going through, someone who actually understands what it's like to have a sugar high and a sugar low and what it's like to have these looming long-term complications. So for me, that was my way out of diabetes burnout. But I would highly recommend going to see someone to speak about what you're going through.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's talk about, wait, any other panelists want to jump in? I'm trying to do like 7 things at once, guys, and I'm easily overwhelmed. So it's not working very well. Okay, no, we're good. So now I want to know about depression and diabetes. We know it's more common. Genevieve says she's struggling at the moment and failing horribly. Also, Genevieve, you're not alone. We are all failing horribly at times. Like, that's what I find so remarkable about it. Like, I'm 14 years with diabetes this year. Surely, by this stage, surely I've got it waxed. And no, obviously I haven't. And it drives me bananas because there are some things you can do. Like, I know what breakfasts I should eat and I know what lunches I should eat. And I can do exactly the same thing 2 days in a row and the results are different. And when I try to explain to my friends who aren't diabetic what this is like, they're like, but how do you deal with that? And it's all the invisible stuff going on behind the scenes, right? Like that cartoon where, like, what's going on in a diabetic's head, and on the outside they're just saying like, I'm fine, thanks, and on the inside it's like, So talk to us about. Oh wait, Bianca wants to know. I want to answer this one because I feel very passionate about trying to explain. Can you please tell me what let me show it? Sorry. Can you please tell me what a low and a high feels like? Trying to understand why my daughter acts the way she does. So, I mean, everyone's different. Maybe we can all share some. My lows feel like panic. So my heart races, I get sweaty, my head goes fuzzy, so I can't think logically, and there's like an intense craving for sugar, which is why it's so easy to overdose when you're low and eat too much and then have a rebound high, which is the worst ever. Highs for me feel like foggy head, irritable, grumpy, kind of like hot and itchy for some reason, but just like everything irritates me and impatient. There's mine. Anyone else want to share their what lows and highs feel like? I'm looking at Earl wants to. What you got, Earl?
I think I just need to reiterate like some of the things that you said, and also like linking it to mental health is because you said it feels like panic, right? So in moments of panic, I found myself feeling like I'm going low.
Yeah.
But when I checked, I'm not really low. So it's really odd though. But I think it's just important to listen to your body. And I mean, the classic signs are like the sort of like confusion. You know, I get a weird feeling in my stomach, almost like it's starting to turn.
Yeah.
Like when I'm really low.
Read somewhere once the dumb things you do when you're low that feel super urgent. This woman was like, I know I'm low, but I suddenly have to unpack the dishwasher. Like it is essential that I unpack the dishwasher before I do anything else. Yeah. And then my friend's like, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, what am I doing? I want to say one more thing. Diving into depression is therapy is a must. Joanne said therapy is a must, but what about those who can't afford therapy? What are alternative solutions? Daniel shared last year one of the best articles I've ever seen online, which I will share. I'll reply to your comment tomorrow and share it. It's a link to how to access mental health through public health systems. And it's excellent. It's like a step-by-step of if you need therapy, how can you get it through the government. It's really good. So I'll share that tomorrow. Okay, Daniel, we're running out of time. It's like we're supposed to have 3 minutes left. I'm going to say that I'm just going to make a blanket decision that will extend by 5 minutes. Because then at least we have 8 minutes. I still feel like we're going to run out of time. And also, clearly, we have a lot to talk about. So we can also do another one of these in the next 6 weeks, 2 months. I love that people are saying that they are realizing that they have diabetes, burnout, and they're not alone. I think that is like the greatest thing. Just to recognize that half of us have it, are going to have it. So yeah, you're not alone. Let me zip it. Daniel, depression, what do we do?
Okay, so look, the first thing is to take a look at the symptoms of depression. A psychiatric disorder that comprises a whole bunch of symptoms which can affect your body, can affect your brain. So I would advise to Google major depressive disorder. That's what it's called these days, and that'll help you identify, whether you might be meeting these criteria. Okay, so look, depression is a very tough thing, and it makes diabetes that much harder to manage. And they exacerbate one another. The diabetes makes depression more likely, the depression makes diabetes harder to manage, and it just ends up being a cycle of overwhelm. There was a question asked earlier, which I can't recall the exact wording, but I think it's important to remember that depression in diabetes, it's not just it's not just an airy-fairy concept. It's not just that we have a weakness of character.
And it's also not just feeling sad.
Yeah, exactly. It's neurological. Yeah. But it's not just because it doesn't suggest that we're not coping with our diabetes. That's a part of it. We're overwhelmed by the demands of having this condition. But at the same time, what we now know from MRI brain scan research is that when you have diabetes, your blood sugars are going to fluctuate. When your blood sugars fluctuate, the amount of glucose that your brain receives alters. It's different from what a person who has normal blood sugar all the time will receive. And our brains are really wonderful things, but they're not very good at coping with alterations in blood glucose. Glucose is the single most important thing for the functioning of the brain. If you're going low, your brain is deprived. If you're going high, there's too much glucose and a whole neurological process happens. And what that means is diabetes, we're at risk of it, not just because this condition is hard to live with, but because our brains are vulnerable to developing it. It's important to know this, and it's important to look out for it, because depression is, after anxiety, one of the most treatable conditions. Certainly that's the case in people who have diabetes.
That's good to know.
Absolutely, it's very treatable. It responds well to treatment. The one form of treatment is therapy, and it doesn't need to be with a diabetes-focused therapist like myself. It can be with any therapist. The other route is medication, and you'd need to consult with a psychiatrist for that, but antidepressant medications are often prescribed to people with diabetes. So those are the treatments, right? And definitely there's state resources for people who need this. You don't just need to go to a private clinician. Failing that, though, and I'm just quickly going to touch on some things which can help you tap into that beautiful word that I love, the resilience. Exercise, so underrated. It helps you with your mood. It helps you with your diabetes. It helps everything. You don't need to be running marathons. As Kirsten said, walk 3 times a week. 30 minutes is enough to treat depression. Not always, but research shows that that can have as significant effect on your depression as medication. The other thing, meditate. Mindfulness meditation rewires your brain. It's an effective way of improving your mood. And the third resilience pointer, this is by no means the end of the list, but the last one that I'll mention is something that you've all done tonight. Connect with your support network. If that's this community, awesome. But if it needs to be your family, your friends, a doctor, a therapist, reach out. And please, I know there's some people saying that you might have depression, you might have burnout. If you don't have somebody to raise this with, bring it up with your doctor. Ask for their opinion. Do you have these conditions? And if so, request a referral so that you can get help for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to ask each of our panelists in the 3 minutes we have remaining to either touch on if you've had depression or anxiety or burnout, and if you have anything to share from that, or parting words. They don't have to be super motivational, because as we've all seen, a bunch of us are just struggling and stuff sucks. And I think we can all just acknowledge that diabetes sucks. But also, guys, would you just look what we got here? When I was diagnosed, I remember saying to my friends and my family, being like, I don't want to be in this club. It's a bunch of losers. I don't want to be in the diabetes club. Now, if I was diagnosed, I'd be like, I could be in this club. Like, these guys are pretty cool. I wouldn't mind hanging out with them. Okay, what you got? Kirsten, you're up.
I so agree with you, Bridget. In the beginning, I remember my diabetic specialist saying, oh, there's some people you can meet up with. And I was like, that's not for me. I'm fine. I'm fine on my own. But yeah, so when it comes to sugar lows, especially, or sugar highs, it feels like you're not present, which really bugs me. Because, you know, if I'm away with friends on a weekend and I'm out of routine eating and I'm sitting at the table with them and I'm feeling really horrible, that happens a lot for me. Or if I'm in a meeting and I'm having a sugar low and then all of a sudden, you know, you're trying to eat your food and they all think you're fine now because you're eating your jelly bean. But like it just sits with you for a while. It sits with you for me, at least 15 minutes to half an hour for me to actually get over my sugar low. And then obviously when you're in social settings and you're either experiencing a high or low, and you're like, I'm actually starting to feel a bit weird now. Like you struggle to get your words out. It's like your brain is like, it's taking longer to process things. So just in terms of that, that's where I struggle the most when it comes to the anxiety.
Go check, just to be safe.
Yeah, I think my sweet potatoes are cooking in. I had sweet potato just before this, so I think they're kicking in, but I think I'm fine. But yeah, just from that point of view, it can be really difficult. So once again, like I'm still working on it, but just try to tell people around you, whether it's just one colleague at work or one friend or one family member or one person at the table, just say, oh, I'm actually not feeling that keen to play a board game right now. I'm not feeling well. I don't have that much energy to be social right now. Like just, you don't want to be the party pooper always, but if you're really not feeling up for it, like just try and speak up. I know it is difficult. But yeah, other than that, follow me on Everyday's Diabetes Day. I'd love to connect with you guys, and I can't wait for what's to come for us. This community is just starting to grow, and it's really exciting.
Someone said, please do another AMA. We're definitely going to, because also the questions and the themes that came up, we've got a lot of people who want to support parents and partners of those with diabetes and how to support. We've got a lot of of like, how do you tell people you have diabetes? We want to talk about diabetes and work. There's a lot of emotional stuff coming up. But quickly, guys, I'm just not looking at the clock. Alyssa, what is your parting words for our community?
Okay, well, first of all, speaking back about the burnout, my burnouts are very silent. So I just make a mental note to myself, you don't have diabetes, so don't worry about anything that's going on around you or even checking your sugars. Another point is when I was diagnosed, I was quite embarrassed to inject myself in public. And it becomes kind of sad when everybody is like, it's dinner time. And then you like, okay, you're running away to the room to go inject yourself while everyone is like ready to take 5 spoons. So yeah, guys, diabetes is not easy, but it's definitely doable. Like we're gonna have our highs and lows, but it's what you make of it. And that I think is what all those newly diagnosed should take in.
I agree. Thank you. Tappy, what are your last final words for this evening? You're on mute. Hold on.
Oh, as I was saying, yeah. So as I was saying, I feel as though anxiety is really real when it comes to diabetes. So going from a 22 to a 4 is something that really does happen. That happens to me quite a lot. And, I've had those mornings when I don't wake up. So I feel as though for me, I've also had those silent burnouts, those things where you don't talk about it and you just burn out on the side. And I feel as though, as Kirsten said, you need to talk about it. You need to tell the people around you that, you know what, this is what I experienced, this is what I go through, and at times I'm going to need help. So seek help, and even if it's a friend, I think it is important to just seek help.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Earl, what you got?
So just quickly, I definitely have experienced burnout, but then it's only once I'm too deep in the burnout that I realize it's actually burnout. You never see it coming, right? I see there was a comment here that I just quickly want to touch on it. It said, what about when you panic, like the panic and you experience and panic attack, and it's not really a low, but you panic because you think you're going low. That's definitely happened to me. And my advice would be try to sort of understand how insulin works and the timing of insulin in your body, so that if you know for sure you took it at a certain time, that it would have a certain sort of desired response, but it doesn't always work that way. So I'd say just try to get a better handle, of your sort of insulin to carb ratio and how it responds with your body. And just to the general, community out there, just know that you're not alone. Just because we on the panel doesn't mean we're superhuman. We go through the same struggles that you go through, and you're welcome to reach out to any one of us if you need to vent, share ideas, or ask any questions. Thanks.
Great. Matt, what are your last thoughts?
I've just been listening so much. Oh, okay. So I just wanted to say that about 4 or 5 months after Jude was diagnosed, I was in a pretty bad state. I wasn't really dealing with it well at all. And I think it was you, Bridget, that told me about medical aid PMBs. And I wasn't aware of that. And I have the Coastal Momentum Healthcare, the basic package. Oh, and on that as well, they pay for 1 sensor a month. Okay. So they cover a 900 a month. Yeah. But they covered a month of therapy for me. And I think, like, as an adult and as a parent, like, sometimes you just feel like you just need to suck it up, kid. And actually the best thing that I did, and Danny, my wife, was like, go sort it out. Yeah. And that was the best. The therapy really, really helped me, and I didn't have to pay a single cent. Medical aids, they covered it all, and I really only have the basic package. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. Good to know. I know I'm on Discovery, and I know they do the same thing. I think you get 12 sessions as part of your PMBs. Yeah, guys, we are 10 minutes over time, and I'm scared of sucking up any more time. This has been so fun. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to Kirsten, Alyssa, Matt, Earl, and Tuppy. Thank you to Daniel for giving us all free therapy. Someone said, can you share his details? Someone else said he's about to be booked out. He is about to be booked out. We did this journal last year with Abbott, this diabetes journal, which is beautiful. And I just got confirmation that we're doing a 2022 one. Look how beautiful. But I interviewed Daniel for a bunch of the articles, and I was just like, let's talk about, hypothetically speaking, if there was a type 1 woman, and then I just got a bunch of free therapy, which was very nice. But I feel like that's what we've all got tonight. I will respond to the questions that I can answer on the Facebook page on Diabetic South Africans. And yeah, follow all our panelists. We are definitely having another one. We have a lot that we didn't get to tonight. So we will keep you posted about that. We generally post them on the page, so on Diabetic South Africans, if you're not following already. Thank you, everyone. You are not alone in this. We are all in it together, and we will see you again next time. Good night.